Lord of the Rings is basic. It's the fantasy equivalent of training wheels, something you read as a kid before graduating to the real, serious stuff. It's quaint, cozy, simple. At least that's the story a lot of sophisticated readers tell themselves. I know, because I used to tell myself the same thing. And here's what I've come to believe. That particular piece of literary snobbery might be the single most embarrassing misconception in the entire history of fandom. Because what if the book everyone dismisses as simple is actually the most technically demanding, linguistically precise fantasy ever written? And we've just been too clever to notice. Before we dig into the book itself, we need to understand who actually wrote it, because children's fantasy author doesn't come close to capturing it. J.R.R. Tolkien was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford University. His life's work was the oldest surviving literature in the English language: Beowulf, the Norse Eddas, the Finnish Kalevala. He wasn't a novelist who decided to write something fun. He was a scholar who spent decades inside the deepest roots of human mythology, and then decided to build something new from what he found there. Fellowship of the Ring was published in 1954, 9 years after the end of World War II. But Tolkien had been building Middle-earth for decades before that, starting during World War I, where he served at the Battle of the Somme, one of the bloodiest engagements in human history. He watched his closest friends die in the mud, and his response, his actual, documented response, was to start inventing an entire world, complete with languages, a cosmology, and thousands of years of history. Grief has a way of making people build things that last. Why does any of this matter right now, in our current moment? Because we live in an era that has trained us to treat cynicism as sophistication. The darker, the grittier, the more morally compromised, the more serious we assume the art must be. We have collectively learned to distrust joy, to see hope as naive, to assume that beauty in a story is evidence that it isn't trying hard enough. Lord of the Rings does not just challenge those assumptions. It dismantles them, quietly, one perfect sentence at a time. Here is the insight I want us to sit with today. The reason so many people bounce off Lord of the Rings when they're younger isn't that the book is too simple. It's that it is too precise. Tolkien is doing something almost no other fantasy writer even attempts. He's writing prose the way a poet writes verse. Every sentence is balanced. Every word is chosen for sound as much as meaning. The rhythm of the language is not decoration. It is part of the argument the book is making. There's a sequence early in Fellowship when the hobbits step out of the Shire and into the Old Forest, and Tolkien writes about the trees with a weight and menace that feels almost primordial. He isn't describing scenery. He is building a felt sense that this place has memory, that it holds grudges, that nature here is not background but active presence. That kind of writing takes decades of literary immersion to develop. It looks effortless because the craftsmanship is complete. Invisible craft is the hardest kind to produce. And that invisibility is exactly what trips people up. When prose flows this well, we mistake the ease of reading for simplicity of content. Readers who are used to fighting through denser writing actually move faster through Tolkien. 50 pages feel like 20. But that's not because nothing is happening. It's because every element of difficulty has been dissolved into the pleasure of the reading experience itself. The craft is so complete it disappears, and we mistake that disappearance for absence. Now let's talk about the thing that surprises almost every reader who comes to this book as an adult: the emotional depth. Specifically, Gimli and Legolas. Here are two characters, a dwarf and an elf, peoples divided by centuries of distrust and cultural contempt, who find in each other a friendship that transcends everything their histories told them to feel. And Tolkien builds this with extraordinary restraint. No grand declarations, no dramatic breakthrough moment, just small, accumulated gestures of shared wonder that become, over time, genuinely moving. When Gimli enters the mines of Moria, his ancestral home, now dark and fallen and silent, Tolkien lets us feel the character's grief through what he doesn't say as much as what he does. And when Legolas moves through the golden wood of Lothlorien, we see through his eyes a beauty so ancient it makes everything else seem young. These two characters are making the same journey and perceiving entirely different worlds. That tension between loss and wonder, between endings and beauty coexisting in the same moment, that is the emotional engine of the entire book. The hobbits themselves get dismissed most often by readers who haven't read this carefully enough. They're written off as the children's portion of an otherwise serious epic, the cute entry point before the real story starts. But that reading completely inverts what Tolkien is actually doing. The hobbits aren't the comic relief. They are the argument. They love food, comfort, gossip, and their own small corner of the world. They are extraordinarily, deliberately ordinary. Placing them at the center of a world historical catastrophe is not a concession to sentimentality. It is a radical claim about where heroism actually originates. There is a line near the end of Fellowship that is one of the most quietly devastating things I have encountered in the genre. Frodo, at the breaking of the Fellowship, makes his decision alone. Not with rage, not with prophecy lighting up around him, just a small, clear-eyed choice made by an ordinary person who has understood something important: that the corruption spreading through the group is already moving faster than he can outrun it with company. That is not a simple moment. That is tragedy in its most classical form, wearing the clothes of an adventure story. Now here is where it gets genuinely interesting. If you've read modern fantasy, the serious, literary kind, First Law, A Song of Ice and Fire, Red Rising, you've already absorbed everything Tolkien invented, refracted through a darker, more ironic lens. Joe Abercrombie's entire career is a sustained conversation with Tolkien. He is asking, what if the Fellowship was made of genuinely broken people? What if the quest corrupted everyone equally? What if the Gandalf figure was playing a long, amoral game? Abercrombie builds brilliant work, but every brick in that foundation was quarried from Middle-earth. J.R.R. Martin has been remarkably honest about this. His stated goal with A Song of Ice and Fire was to interrogate the fantasy conventions Tolkien established, the clean moral lines, the sense of divine destiny, the assumption that the right people will win because they are, fundamentally, the right people. Martin wanted to break that. He did it brilliantly. But the point is, you can only break something that already exists and has real structural integrity. Tolkien built the cathedral. Everyone since has been renovating it. Here's what's remarkable about coming to Tolkien after reading all that neo-gritty fantasy. It actually makes you a better reader of Fellowship. You can see the structural choices he's making in real time, the places where he could have pivoted toward darkness and deliberately chose beauty instead, where he could have made characters morally ambiguous and chose instead to let them be genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. Those aren't failures of imagination or a simpler era's limitations. They are decisions, considered meaningful, hard decisions. The book knows what darkness looks like. It chooses something else anyway. There is also a connection to serious literary fiction that almost never gets discussed in conversations about Tolkien. He is doing something very similar to what Cormac McCarthy does at his best, using landscape as moral landscape, making geography carry the weight of theme. The Mines of Moria aren't just a setting. They are a meditation on ambition and its cost. The dead marshes, with their drowned faces glowing beneath the water, aren't just atmospheric. They are a vision of what prolonged violence leaves behind in a world's memory. The geography is always doing double duty. Here is the moment where most people's understanding of this book genuinely shifts. Tolkien did not write Lord of the Rings and then invent the history of Middle-earth to support it. He did it completely backwards. The mythology, what eventually became the Silmarillion, the tales of the First and Second Ages, the creation of the world itself, came first. Tolkien spent 30 years building the deep history of this world before he wrote the story we all know. Fellowship of the Ring is the surface ripple of something incomprehensibly vast underneath. Every casual reference to ancient history in the text is connected to thousands of pages of actual, worked-out lore. He also invented not one but multiple complete languages. Quenya and Sindarin, the two primary Elvish tongues, have full grammatical systems, phonological rules, and deep etymological histories that Tolkien developed over decades. The line that closes our source material today, the one that stopped a reader cold at the end of Fellowship, "What ship would bear me ever back across so wide a sea?" That is not just beautiful English writing. That is a translation. Tolkien was rendering an Elvish mode of thought into English, from a language he built specifically because this world deserved its own tongue. And I'll wager this one surprises you. The reason hobbits feel so specifically, recognizably English, with their love of gardens, afternoon tea, comfortable furniture, and cheerful gossip, is because Tolkien designed them that way with complete intentionality. He needed a point of entry into a mythology that would otherwise feel entirely alien to the modern reader. The Shire is a mirror held up to a particular kind of English domesticity. Comfortable, bounded, self-satisfied, and the entire moral and emotional journey of the book is the journey of leaving it, of discovering that the comfortable life was always being underwritten by a world far larger and more dangerous than you were allowed to see. So let's bring this all together. What actually changes when you see Lord of the Rings this way? When you understand that the simplicity is the achievement, that Tolkien chose accessibility over obscurity, beauty over irony, earned hope over fashionable despair. The entire book transforms under your hands. You stop reading it as a relic of a more innocent literary era and start reading it as a sustained argument, an argument that the world contains genuine beauty worth protecting. That ordinary people can do significant things not in spite of their ordinariness, but because of it. That grief and wonder are not opposites, they are companions. The reader whose experience started us on this journey today, someone who came to fellowship convinced they had outgrown it, who almost didn't pick it up, found something that every ironic reading culture keeps trying to bury under cynicism, a book that earns its hope. Not naive hope, not the hope of someone who hasn't looked at the darkness, but hope that has walked through the mines of Moria, that has seen the drowned faces in the marshes, that has watched the fellowship break, and that decides with full information to keep moving anyway. That is not basic. That has never been basic. That is one of the hardest things literature can do. If this changed how you think about Lord of the Rings, if it's made you want to read it for the first time or revisit it with new eyes, you'll love our deep dive into the Silmarillion, the mythology Tolkien built before the story, and why understanding it transforms every page of Fellowship into something even richer. Every throwaway reference to ancient kings and fallen light becomes a doorway into something vast. That video is right here, and I promise you, it's worth the trip.